mysterious death of a British Columbia resident made no sense at all. In fact, it was completely bizarre. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just the strange happenings of the world, you've come to the right place. Be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. Let's get started. Robert Dennis Blair Adams was a 31-year-old man living in Surrey, British Columbia. Surrey is a city in the province of British Columbia, Canada, located south of the Fraser River and north of the Canada-United States border. Although it is mainly a suburban city, Surrey is the province's second largest by population after Vancouver. 31-year-old Robert would eventually start going by Blair Adams as he got older. In 1996, Blair Adams was the foreman at a construction company, and those who knew Blair said that he liked his job and he was incredibly good at his job. And it seemed like everybody in his life really liked him. His friends, his family, his coworkers, they never had a bad thing to say about him. They would say that Blair was optimistic and friendly and quite charismatic, and they would note that he always had a smile on his face. It really seemed like Blair Adams didn't have an enemy in the world, but that would all change in the summer of 1996. That friendly and cheerful and warm outlook that Blair was so known to have had suddenly disappeared. He was suddenly having mood swings and anxiety, and those around him began to take notice. Whatever was on Blair's mind began to take a toll on him. He was even sleeping less. The changes in Blair were so evident that his mother, Sandra, would ask him what was going on. Sandra would go on to say, something was obviously very much the matter. He hadn't been sleeping well. Something was wrong. I asked him numerous times what was wrong, and he said, I don't think I should tell you about it. And to this day, I don't know what it is. And then Blair Adams would do something completely bizarre. On July 5th, 1996, Blair Adams would go to the bank, empty his account, and then go to a safe deposit box and empty that as well. He took $6,000 in cash and thousands more in jewelry, gold, and platinum. 2 days later, on July 7th, Blair would arrive at the US-Canadian border, and he made efforts to enter the US. But because he was a young, unmarried man carrying quite a bit of money in gold and platinum, they denied his entry. Blair fit the profile for a drug trafficker, so he was denied entry. The very next day, on July 8th, Blair went to his place of employment and quit his job. He got his last check, and then he left. And that was really surprising to everybody that knew him. He was quite a responsible young person, so it didn't make sense that he would just come to his job and quit out of the blue. He hadn't told anybody that he was unhappy with his job, and in fact, he seemed to like his job quite a bit. Later on the same day, July 8th, Blair would head to the airport and buy a round-trip ticket for $1,600 to Germany. His flight was going to leave the very next day on July 9th. After he booked a ticket, he went to his friend's home. And the friend would later say that Blair showed up and he seemed to be in a complete panic. He said that he really needed to get across the US-Canadian border and that he needed help doing so because somebody was trying to kill him. But his friend was incredibly honest and said, I can't help you with this. And then on July 9th, 1996, Blair was spotted before dawn trying to cross the US-Canadian border on foot. As he gets to the border, he matches the description of an auto theft suspect. A blue car had been stolen in Vancouver and had been found near the point that he was trying to cross at. A friend would later say that they saw Blair Adams driving a blue car around, and it wasn't his car. Again, Blair would be denied entry, but he did convince them that he hadn't stolen a car, so he was free to go. Instead of going to Germany as he had planned that day, Blair turned in his tickets, rented a car, and drove back to the US-Canada border. And I just want to note the car he rented was a Nissan, and that's going to come into play later. This time, Blair managed to get through border crossing, and he wound up in Seattle. He would ditch the Nissan Altima he was driving at the Seattle airport, and then he purchased an overnight one-way flight to Washington, D.C. Lieutenant Jones, who was working this case, would go on to say, he paid about $770 for a one-way ticket when he could have purchased a round-trip ticket for approximately $350 or $400. So it would have been half the price for a round-trip ticket as he paid for a one-way ticket. It just seemed very unusual. Blair did arrive to DC in the early mornings of July 10th. He rented a Toyota and began his 500-mile journey to Knoxville, Tennessee. Perry Moyers was another detective working this case. Remember, he went through multiple jurisdictions, so there is quite a few people involved in this case. Harry Moyers would go on to say, I mean, why go to DC to turn around and come back to Knoxville? He had no reason to be in East Tennessee. He had no reason to be in Knoxville. He knew no one in East Tennessee or the eastern US. So as Blair begins this 7-hour drive to Tennessee, he does get in a car accident. On Highway 250 in Troy, Virginia, Blair does back his car up into another car. There was only minor damage, and the man whose car was hit, he would go on to say that Blair was very nice, but he seemed to be in a hurry. And then he kind of disappeared until around 5:30 p.m. when he pulled into a gas station in Knoxville, Tennessee. So when he went to the gas station, an interstate repair serviceman known as Gerald Sapp was called. The gas station clerk did call him and say, there's this man here and he's saying that the key to his car isn't working. Can you come out and check it out? So Gerald arrives on scene and he goes over to Blair, and Blair shows him the key and he's like, well, that's a Nissan key and you're driving a Toyota. And remember, Blair had rented a Nissan for the first leg of his trip when he was crossing the border. Gerald Sapp would go on to say, I asked him to look in his pockets. I said, if you drove this thing up here, you gotta have another key in your pockets. And he wouldn't look, so I thought he was nuts. He was bound and determined that he had the key he needed for that car. So this man, Gerald Sapp, is like, listen, you're holding a Nissan key. You can't drive your car because you have a Toyota. So you need to look for the Toyota key, which you must have because you drove this Toyota all the way here. So Sapp would arrange for a tow truck to come and tow the Toyota for Blair. And then he would give Blair a ride to a nearby hotel. He did say when he dropped him off that Blair Adams walked away without his bag, so he got out of the car and brought it to him. Sapp just went home. He doesn't know what happened to Blair. But he would say, the guy was not all there. He didn't appear to be messed up. He didn't appear to be on drugs, but his mind wasn't functioning correctly for some reason. So I just want to pause here and say that is just incredibly confusing. Blair did drive 500 miles in that Toyota, so he had to have the key on him. So my question is, why didn't he stop and look for the key when this service provider was there saying, listen, you have the wrong key. Let's just look around the car and around the surrounding areas and get the key and you'll be ready to go. Instead, he said, just tow the car to the hotel, take me over, everything will be fine. That seems really strange to me. Was he not in his right state of mind? Was something else happening? I don't know. And it seemed like he failed to turn on the Nissan key. Maybe he had one or two of them. I'm not sure, but he did have the Nissan key, presumably for the car he rented. So that's another strange piece to the puzzle. Did he forget? Did he do it purposely? I don't know. CCTV cameras would catch more odd behavior of Blair when he got to the hotel. The guest service representative at the hotel at the time would go on to describe Blair's behavior. They would say, the best way to describe him would be paranoid, nervous, agitated, expecting someone to come in on him, even though there wasn't anybody there. I don't know who he was waiting for, but he was waiting for somebody to walk in for him. What's even more strange is the hotel security footage showed that in the space of an hour that Blair was there, he went in and out of the lobby 5 times before paying for his room. After he does finally check in, he puts the key in his pocket and then he leaves the hotel. And that's around 7:37 p.m. that night. And Blair would never return back to that hotel. But 3 employees at the T&R truck stop claimed that they did see Blair between 9:30 and 10:30, and he was slipping through tattoo magazines while talking to another man about Canadian money. And then 2 women would come forward to detectives and say, I think we saw Blair Adams that night at the Cracker Barrel. And he was with another man, but we don't know who that man was. 12 hours later, Blair's body would be found inside a parking lot about half a mile from his hotel. And not only were his final days of his life completely odd and bizarre, but the crime scene was just the same. Someone had ripped open his shirt and they had taken his pants off and both of his socks. His socks were inside out, so that tells detectives that most likely the murderer did take off Blair's clothing. There was about $4,000 in German, Canadian, and American money laying around him. Police would also discover a bag of gold and jewels at the scene that hadn't been taken. And that Toyota key that Blair was absolutely certain about was laying about 10 feet away from his body. An autopsy would show that Blair Adams died from a blow to the stomach, most likely by a club or a crowbar. He also had a gash on his head, and they assumed he was most likely struck by the same weapon. They very much know that a fight ensued. Blair had defensive wounds on his hands, chunks of his hair was pulled out, and he had a piece of hair that didn't belong to him in his hand. It was also believed that Blair Adams was sexually assaulted, but there was no DNA to confirm this. Detectives would canvass the area And they came across a construction worker who said that at around 3:30 a.m. he did hear screams, but he thought it was a woman screaming. So this is quite the puzzle, because not only was Blair doing some very odd things, he did tell multiple people that somebody was trying to kill him, and he would tell his mother that somebody was spreading rumors about him. So he would make this 500-mile journey from DC to Tennessee. So along the way, he must have had to make stops. He had to get gas, he maybe used the bathroom or got food. So I know that it's 1996 and tracking people certainly wasn't as easy, but there doesn't seem to be much evidence about where his movements were until 5:30 when he came to that gas station in Knoxville. At the time of Blair Adams' death, he was sober for 2 years. And in the past, he did deal with addiction, but the autopsy report didn't find any drugs or alcohol in his system. He had never been diagnosed with any mental health issues. That doesn't mean he didn't have them, he just hadn't been diagnosed. Some more details would emerge in 2017, so let's take a look at those. In a phone conversation, Blair Adams' mother, Sandra, would describe her son as a kind and nice person. She said that he was ambitious and that he never suffered from any sort of mental health issues. She would say that she didn't believe he was suffering with mental illness when he went missing, but she would drop a bombshell, one that she hadn't mentioned previously. She did say that Blair Adams was romantically involved with one of his male roommates. She would say, "They acted a little strangely and giggled a lot, and it was kind of odd, but then he went back to a heterosexual relationship after that." It doesn't matter what his sexual preferences were, whether he was gay or bisexual, it doesn't matter, but withholding that information is pretty much withholding potential suspects. So that seems a little strange to me. And then she would tell a reporter information that she never told police at the time. Blair's mother would later claim that the reason he was traveling to the South was to attend the Olympic Games in Atlanta, Georgia. But she had never mentioned this to the detectives at the time of his disappearance and then murder. The Olympics would begin on July 19th, which was 8 days after Blair Adams' body had been found, and his body was found about 200 miles away from where he should have been if he was going to the Olympics. I do want to note that Blair's mother never explained why he was going there, how she knew about her son's destination, or why she hadn't told police when he was murdered. She would just simply say that was the point of his whole trip. But this reporter wouldn't give up, and he continued to call the home of Blair Adams. But instead of reaching Blair's mother, he oftentimes got Blair's stepfather, who was incredibly angry. In one phone call, he would say, "The chances of solving this case are remote as hell. We're not going to open that can of worms again." And then he hung up. I do think it's important to note that Blair Adams was working in 1995 for his father's construction company in Germany. He did meet a woman there while attending a party in November, and they began to date. This woman would say that Blair was a gentleman, but other people that had been working with Blair at the time said that he was abrasive and confrontational. And they would even say that on occasion, he did get into fights. I did note that Blair Adams told many people that he was afraid for his life and that somebody was trying to kill him. But more specifically, he told his German girlfriend and at least one other friend there, he said he dreaded violence from former coworkers that had returned from Germany. And remember, he booked that round-trip ticket to Germany. When he went to refund this German ticket, he said that the person he was going to visit had gotten sick, so he no longer needed to go. And when they asked his German girlfriend about this, she said, "I wasn't expecting him. I didn't know he was coming." And the detective working the case in Tennessee doesn't believe that Blair was at that tattoo shop, but they do know that he had a final meal before he was murdered. The thing is, after he left the hotel, he didn't have a car, but he was found dead with lettuce and meat and shrimp in his stomach still. I would say the number one question here is, Blair claimed that somebody was trying to kill him. So did somebody follow him from Canada all the way to the US to Tennessee to kill him? Or did he just come across another killer randomly as he was out that night from the hotel? Or could he have been possibly meeting up with somebody that he knew from Tennessee? Because his body was found in the way that it was, detectives believe sexual assault had occurred and that was the motive for the crime. A truck stop near the crime scene was apparently a hotbed for prostitution at that time. So detectives really worked the theory that a prostitute or one of their pimps was the one that perpetrated this crime. One of the detectives on the case would go on to say, Adams could have started the act and never got it and got rolled. Or maybe it was a female prostitute, maybe she had a pimp that was close by and they were going to roll this guy and they got scared and didn't. He would say that the sex could have started in the vehicle and then a struggle began. The killer might have hit Adams in the head, and then pushed him out of the car. And then while he was driving away, he struck Adams, and that would explain the tear in his stomach. But the other detective, Davenport's, his theory about the car would explain Blair Adams' hand, because Blair Adams' hand was blackened. The detective, known as Davenport, would go on to say, he caught the pavement. If you've ever wrecked a motorcycle, you know how the rocks or pavement will eat you up. One of his hands looked like that. So it seems like their basic theory is this was a sex crime, that somebody found him or that he had hired prostitution or something of the sort. It got out of hand and he was murdered. And I don't believe that for a reason. If this was a prostitute, if this was somebody he hired for sex, why wouldn't they rob him? There was tons of money laying around his body. There was jewelry. There was gold. There was platinum. They could have made out like a bandit. Instead, they killed him and just left it all there. It doesn't seem plausible to me. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just seems like a red flag. And a few other things do stand out to me as important. Blair's mother did withhold information. If she had known where her son was going at the time of his murder, why didn't she tell detectives that? Why didn't she tell them about his relationship with his roommate? That seems a little suspect to me. And why book a flight to Germany? It seems like he was worried about some of his coworkers that he'd been working with in Germany. So what was the point of going there? Presumably those coworkers were now home, as he stated to one of his friends or his girlfriend. So going to Germany, maybe to lay low and try to get away from these people makes sense, but I'm not sure. I'm really inclined to say that whoever murdered Blair Adams was not a stranger. I think I mostly feel this way because none of his stuff was missing. If somebody did murder him because of a sexual assault, maybe they would want to try to cover up and make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Blair very much believed that he was going to be murdered, so he knew somebody had vendetta against him. Maybe somebody was following him. And I do want to note that the police's theory about this maybe being a pimp, wouldn't it make sense that if a pimp murders somebody, they're going to steal all of their money? That's the whole point of their job, to make a large amount of money. And there was tons of money just sitting there waiting to be taken. So for me, it does seem personal. Who commits a crime and there's $4,000 in cash just sitting there and they leave it? Something about that really bothers me. The Toyota key being found next to him bothers me quite a bit. Blair Adams very much could have been having some paranoid delusion or something like that. Maybe he misplaced the Toyota key and he just couldn't seem to find it and he was frantic and he was in a panic and he was worried about somebody catching up to him. But the key was found away from his body. Something about that just really doesn't sit right with me. Perhaps when he got out of the car to fill up the gas tank, did he leave his key in there and somebody took it and he realized that he was in serious trouble at that point? And then the killer, after they followed him that night and murdered him, dropped the key there? I know that seems like a stretch, but oftentimes truth is stranger than fiction. I do want to note that his body was found at a construction site. It was where a hotel was being built. Is that a coincidence? He was in the construction business. He did have issues with people in Germany as he was working construction at his stepfather's company. Something about that seems very eerie. Also, if his mother knew he was going to the Olympics, why did he book a trip to Germany? Something about that seems off. And if she withheld this information for all of those years, was it something she made up after the fact? Or was it actually a fact that he had planned to go to the Olympics, but he felt like his life was in danger, so he started doing all of these different things to maybe keep himself safe? I don't know. But I would love to know your thoughts on the case. I did put together a timeline, as you guys can see. I think it's helpful to look at that and kind of track the known movements of Blair. Although detectives believe that he wasn't at that tattoo shop or Cracker Barrel, somebody did believe that they saw him there. So I don't know. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Was this a random crime, or was Blair right and somebody was trying to kill him? But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video or any other video on my channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. If there's a case you'd like me to cover, pop in the comments below and I'll be sure to get to it. In the meantime, check out some other videos on my channel while you wait for the next upload, and I'll see you then.